Okay, now we're going to go through the Giver chapter 14. Remember, the Giver has decided to give Jonas a memory that's not so pleasant because he's ready to feel pain. So he's on the sled and everything's great to begin with, and then but then he realizes that the runners can't slice through the frozen expanse as they had on the other snow-cushioned hill. So the runners they go to one side and the sled gathers speed, and Jonas tries to pull on the rope and steer, but everything just takes control and he is then flying through the air. The sled hits a bump and his leg twists under him, and he breaks his leg in a very, very nasty way. It says, then the first wave of pain, he gasped. It was as if a hatchet lodged in his leg, slicing through each nerve with a hot blade. In his agony, he perceived the word fire. You know, when you're in extreme pain, it feels like fire, and felt flames licking at torn bone and flesh. He tried to move and could not. The pain grew. So he's like in terrible pain, and he throws up because the pain's so bad. And then all of a sudden he wakes up and he's in the annex room, but his body still remembers the pain. And he's actually even limping. His leg hurt, even though his leg isn't injured, because of the memory of the pain. And that's what happens when you have extreme pain. The memory of the pain never really goes away. And he asks for relief of pain, and the Giver says no. He realizes that the pain of the sunburn was small in comparison, and it had not stayed with him. But this ache lingered. Lingered means that it stays there even after it's gone, in a way. Like when you talk about something like the perfume of a person lingering in the room even after the person has left, the pain still remains. Okay, it wasn't unendurable, meaning it wasn't completely impossible to bear. He remembered that the chief elder had told him that he was brave. His father asks him if something's wrong, and he obviously can't tell him. He says no to medication because he's not allowed to take medication. And he realizes that something which is separating him and his family. He says they have never known pain. And he feels really, really lonely when you're experiencing something and you can't even describe it to other people. It really separates you from that. So, and he goes to sleep and he still sleeps. He still dreams of the pain. And now the daily training continues, and now he's being taught about pain. And it says the agony of the fractured leg began to seem little more than a mild discomfort as the Giver led Jonas firmly, little by little, into the deep and terrible suffering of the past. So he always ends it with some kind of kindness, with some kind of nice memory, but it's not enough to assuage the pain. It's not enough to make the pain go away. And he just doesn't understand why all these bad things happened. He says why after he remembers being really, really hungry. We're talking about starving as in, starvation in a country like in Africa. He says, and he asks the Giver, why do you and I have to hold these memories? And the Giver says it gives us wisdom. Without wisdom, I could not fulfill my function of advising the committee of elders when they call upon me. And he asks, well, what wisdom do you get from hunger? So the Giver gives them an example. And he says that a few years ago, a lot of the citizens petitioned the committee of elders that they wanted to increase the rate of births. They wanted each birth mother to be assigned 4 births instead of 3. And then the population would increase and there would be more labourers available. And Jonas says that makes sense. And he said that certain family units could accommodate an additional child, meaning that they could take care of another child. Jonas mentions that his could, and he likes having Gabriel around. And the Giver continues. He says the committee of elders sought my advice, and he's used the memory. He remembers hunger came back many generations back. The population had gotten so big that hunger was everywhere, excruciating hunger and starvation. It was followed by warfare. Warfare meaning war. Okay, as we know, in countries which are where there is a competition for resources, and there's a tremendous growth in population. This often results in famine and starvation if the country isn't managed properly. And when there's famine and starvation, there's war. Or sometimes there's war and the war leads to famine and starvation. We don't have to look any further than Africa to see that happens, and it's still happening. But Jonas doesn't know what warfare is. Warfare, it was a concept that Jonas did not know. But hunger was familiar to him now. So he asked, "Do you describe it to them?" And the giver says, "No, they didn't want to hear about the pain, they just seek the advice. I simply advise them against increasing the population." And then Jonas asked, "Well, that was before I was born, but they hardly ever come to you for advice." And so that he wants to know, when was the last time there was a problem that the elders consulted the giver, and he mentions that it was the day that the plane flew over the community. Apparently, it seems that this plane, where the book begins, there's the plane that flies over, if you remember, and now the giver reveals that they were prepared to shoot it down, but they sought my advice, and I told them to wait. And Jonas wants to know, "How did you know?" And he says, "I didn't know, but I used my wisdom from the memories. I knew there had been times in the past, terrible times, when people had destroyed destroyed others in haste and fear." Haste is like in being too much of a hurry to do things, in fear, and have brought about their own destruction. And Jonas realizes that means the giver has memories of destruction, and that's why he has to give the memories to him, even though it hurts. And Jonas still can't understand why everyone can't have the memories. He says, "I think it would be a little bit easier if the memories were shared, if everybody took a part." And the giver says, "You're right, but then everybody would be burdened and pained." Okay, they don't want that, and that's the reason the receiver is so vital to them and so honoured. This is a very interesting idea, and this is something that you need to think about, because if you think about nowadays, there's a lot that we do to try to remove the pain of certain memories from people. There are people who go around and they have trauma, and as a result of trauma and bad things that happen to them, they become addicted to things in order to get away from the pain, the burden of those memories. And I think the writer of The Giver is taking these ideas, and he's taking it to an extreme in this world. In this world, they've decided that nobody's going to suffer from the bad memories in the first place that create the trauma and create all the distress. So Jonas really gets very upset. Says, "It wasn't fair. Let's change that." And the giver says, "What do you think we should do? I've never been able to think of a way, and I'm supposed to be the one with all the wisdom." And Jonas says, "But there are two of us now. Together we can think of something." And the giver says, and the giver gives him a smile. And Jonas, being young and optimistic and naive, he thinks, we could just apply for change of rules. And the giver says, "The decision was made long before my time or yours, and the previous receiver. And before the previous receiver, back and back and back," Jonas repeated the familiar phrase. Sometimes it seemed humorous to him, sometimes it had seemed meaningful and important. But now it was ominous. Ominous means that it sounds like it's going to bring on something bad. It meant he knew that nothing could be changed. This is a very, very important moment here, because here Jonas realizes that there's something very wrong with the community he lives in. He realizes that not allowing people to share in the memory of what happened in the past, good or bad, is a very, very problematic thing. And he also realizes it's not something that's going to change, and this is going to motivate Jonas in the next few chapters in everything that he does. Now we're going to go home, and he sees that the new child Gabriel is growing. He's doing well. He's passing on his developmental tests, but he still isn't sleeping well. He remained fretful at night, whimpering, often needing frequent attention. And his father says, after all the extra time I've put into him, he feels like, I hope they're not going to decide to release him. And his mother, she says, maybe it's for the best. It's a lot of work for you getting up at night. And Lily says, well, if they release Gabriel, can we have someone else instead as a visitor? Can we have another new child? And his father says, no, it doesn't usually happen that we have a situation like this. So you probably won't get another new child just to take care of in the evenings. And then we hear of a story, and this is very, very important, because we're going to find out later why this is going to change the way Jonas looks at the community completely. There's a birth mother expecting twins, and twins, it seems here, is not a good thing. Oh dear, mother said, if they're identical, I hope you're not the one assigned. I am. I'm next on the list. I'll have to select the one to be nurtured and the one to be released. This means that if you have twins, one of them gets released. And if it's a matter of birth weight, it's the smaller of the two. And Jonas is still trying to figure out, well, what is happening? Well, where does a person go when they're released? What is elsewhere? Who would receive this tiny released twin? And then he thinks of something hopeful, but he realizes it's foolish. He's thinking about this old woman, Larissa, who got released. And he thought, wouldn't it be nice if the twin went to her? But he knows that old people aren't given children to raise. And she wouldn't want the responsibility of nurturing a new child. And then he has this idea. He's like, why don't we he says to his mum and dad, why don't we put Gabriel's crib in my room tonight? I know how to feed and comfort him, and I would let you and father get some sleep. Then Jonas does bring, after persuading his parents, he brings the baby into his room, and the baby sleeps all right to begin with, but then he wakes up and he's getting very restless, and Jonas at this point does something which he's really not supposed to do. He gives him a memory, right? He called the memory of the sail forward again. Okay, so he gives him the memory of being in a sailboat. And this seems to calm the child into sleeping very well. And Jonas no longer has this memory. He's wondering, oh, well, never mind, I kind of get the giver to give him another memory. But he realizes that he really shouldn't have done that. And also he's very frightened of the fact that he has a power now to give the memories over. He says that he had this power frightened him, but still on the other hand, he decides not to tell of what he did with Gabriel.